Welcome to the Simple Doesn't Mean Easy podcast. We are here weekly working at simplifying things in our lives, one day at a time, one simple step at a time. Today, the step that we're focusing on is how we can get truly high quality protein in our meals, how we can put the best meat on our family table, how we can decipher the terms and the marketing ploys and really get to the bottom of what the best meat is for our family. I'm excited because our guest is Doug Stonebreaker. He is the director of the supply chain of 99 counties. I'm your host, Michelle Visser, by the way. And Doug and I are just, it's a fascinating chat that we get into. And I think you're really going to like this. I was fascinated with his background. He shares his background in ranching. He is the most legit rancher you're going to find. And it was just really great to sit down and pick his brain. He has been ranching from the west coast of California and now into Iowa. And he's even worked with Temple Grandin. If you don't know who that is, I should explain. He mentions her. And I don't believe we explain that she is an animal behavior expert. She also is a very well known autism spokesperson. And she designs humane livestock facilities. Such a cool thing. She's passionate about it and she is very well known for doing an amazing job. And it's very interesting that Doug has worked with her, and he'll get into that. We unpack so many terms that we see plastered on meat at the grocery store. And Doug helps us understand what ones really don't matter at all and what to look for. And he also gets into, he, he breaks down for us where our meat is coming from. If you're standing in the meat aisle and looking at your packaging, you can be pretty guaranteed that it's coming from one of four sources, and two of them aren't even in the US. And he breaks that down and explains the meat monopoly that we are facing as a nation. And he helps us understand the difference between organic and regenerative. And best part, don't don't miss this. This is near the end. He gets into what questions we should be asking of our meat suppliers. So you're going to love this. But before we dive in, I want to make sure that you go to solelyrested.com/beef. In fact, you know what? Go ahead and do it right now. I'll be here waiting when you get back. I promise. Solelyrested.com/beef. SOULY rested.com/BEEF. There's a couple things I want you to check out there. First of all, an in-depth explanation of 99 counties. I'm introducing you to them. It is truly the best place that I have found ever to buy meat. It is putting the best meat on the table that I can for my family. And it's also supporting small family farms out in the Midwest. It's a win-win. And the prices are unbelievably fantastic. On top of that, even more importantly, the meat, I have not had a cut that I was not over the moon in love with. Every single thing we have tried, I'm on my second box now from 99 counties. Everything we have tried has gotten A plus off the charts satisfaction from everyone in our family. Really good stuff. And they want to give you $30 off your first order. So definitely go to solelyrested.com/beef. I also have put together an entire week's meal plan for you to help you put dinner on the table using the high quality meat. All the recipes are there and the full meal plan. Go check it out, download that, and enjoy that as well. solelyrested.com/beef. Well, Doug, I am so glad that you could take some time to sit down and talk with me today
Sure.
because this topic of the meat that we're buying is something that I think trips a lot of people up. And a
Mhm.
lot of people, have been following my podcast for years and they're cleaning out their pantry and they're getting all the good ingredients and they're choosing maple syrup over refined sugar and they're getting cacao powder instead of cocoa powder. But every day we're feeding our family meat, hopefully, if ideally part of all three meals, and
Mhm.
we're struggling with, is it good meat? Where do I get this meat? And what, I we have pigs that we raise here on our pig farm, but
Mhm.
we only raise enough for ourselves and a few other families. So many
Mhm.
times people will reach out and say, how do we get some of your pork? And I'm like, I can't help you. You know?
Hmm.
So I'm really excited to have this talk with you about how we can source good quality meat, what to be looking for, and what things to just ignore because they really are worthless. so,
Right, right.
so let's start off with
Yeah,
you introducing yourself. Tell everybody something about yourself and about ranching. You have such a deep background in that. I don't know how you can keep this to a few minutes, but tell us about yourself.
yeah. Well, high level, I mean, I grew up in the Central Valley in California and kind of moved around between the Central Valley, the Southern Sierras, and the Mojave Desert. But there, I was able as a kid, just besides being like your typical 4-H FFA kid, I was kind of notorious for like, wanting to raise everything. I had lop-eared rabbits and chickens and ducks and Hereford steers and
Mm,
sheep and Suffolk sheep. And
mm,
anyway, I did all of that. But was also
that's
able to
awesome.
work in a really diverse agricultural area where I worked on dairy farms. I worked in a conventional feedlot and slaughterhouse.
Oh, wow.
As a young guy, and I worked on ranches in the Sierras, and so I was able to do a lot of things, pick cantaloupes, in the Central Valley. So I was able to do a lot of things there, and so it was really I had the bug, and fast forward, I suppose, when I was in college, I was in grad school, and I had the opportunity to work for a ranch that was very unique. It was Prather Ranches in Mount Shasta area, Northern California, and this ranch was really trying. This was early on, and this ranch was really trying to do a lot of things different. So they were one of the first to really work out what it meant to raise organic beef,
Mm.
and one of the first to become certified through QAI, Quality Assurance International. And
Oh,
they're
wow.
also looking to see what it would mean to raise cattle more humanely. So working closely with Temple Grandin and her program, Certified Humane Program, and actually
Wow.
built a
So you
small,
personally have worked with Temple Grandin.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So we were
awesome.
working with, and then we built a slaughterhouse there on the ranch. There was a slaughterhouse built that was so the cattle could stay at the ranch and not have to be trucked and moved through.
Oh,
And the
that's
slaughterhouse again was
awesome.
built using these certified humane standards. So we actually had a
Mm,
little plaque right above the kill box that said that asked us to give a moment of respect for the animal that's giving its life,
ah,
things like that. And
I love
so
it.
this was like this was early in. So I went down because I've been going to school in the Bay Area, San Francisco area. I kind of spoke Bay Areanese, and so I went down to sell this, beef that we were raising to the Bay Area, to folks in the Bay Area. And the only place really to go and do that at the time was Farmers Market.
Mhm.
So I went down, and it was really an amazing time. Like this was new stuff. The markets were still small and very grassroots, and the organic movement essentially started as a vegetarian movement in the United States,
Oh.
where there was no meat in the farmers markets at that time.
Hmm.
And so, whereas in Europe, the agrobiologica had always been both meat and veggies and stuff. So this whole thing of selling meat in the farmers market was kind of a new idea. I had this little gold wing
Wow.
trailer, and I would go in, and I had a spot there at the Green Street Market in
Interesting.
San Francisco. We had a spot, and
Did
it
you get some
was
grief from some
we did.
people?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we did. So we had, a lot of stinky eyes at first, like what's this meat in our market? And some were more open to it than others, but there would be days when I would go in and we would actually have vegans in my spot telling us that we couldn't come and shouldn't be there.
Ah. Mhm.
And then I would have conventional like cow calf rancher friends who thought I was a crazy hippie, with all my organic, certified humane stuff. So we
Right.
were really in between worlds, but it was also
Mm.
an amazing time because I was at the time right when it was just we started before, but then Michael Pollan wrote his book, his Omnivore's Dilemma, introduced Joe Salatin to the world.
Wow. So you were
Um,
out there before it all really even started doing this.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah. I was
do you
on
know
an
the
island.
year roughly when it was that
That
you
would have been
started
in the
selling
in
meat?
the mid to late '90s is when
Okay.
that happened. And then Eric Schlesinger's Fast Food Nation. That was another
Yeah.
book that really helped us. And then Alice Waters was a friend and a super big help at that time. The chef in the Bay Area
Mhm.
who really started that kind of local food chef restaurant
Okay.
movement. And
Nice.
that was big. And she was a great supporter and educator for us. And so it started to
Mm.
pick up steam, and then it really started to take off. And so uh, it was a great time. I mean, it was really dynamic. And so long story short, then I what I'd realized was that no matter how good a job we did trying to sort out these things around sustainability and organic practices, somebody was going to have to go down there and educate people and find consumers, build a tribe around what we were trying to do, because this was
Right.
all kind of new stuff. And um and it, and it, it was hard, especially then. So I decided to commit all my time to kind of just running my own business around trying to sell the product, because we needed that direct to consumer relationship. We didn't have the
Right.
margins to like go out and go big in wholesale or grocery stores or whatever, and honestly they weren't really very interested at the time.
Hmm.
so
So
um
you
so
didn't
that's
have a
that's what I
marketing
did.
background, right?
No, I did
You're
not.
just the ag kid, and this is
Hmm.
suddenly something you're thrown into, but it sounds like you went into it eagerly because you saw the need for it.
I did,
Yeah.
yeah, and
I
uh,
love it.
and and I believed in it.
Yeah.
And coming up in the kind of the commodity environment, conventional environment. I admittedly had issues with sort of how that was done. I was also big, uh, you know, ecology guy, and a nature
Mm.
lover and animal lover,
Mhm.
and so I really wanted to go out and see if we could make a difference in this food
Mm.
chain and do something different.
Mhm.
So I threw myself into it, and I ended up doing that, and have done it for the rest of my remainder of my career. It's been about 28 years now. So
Mm.
from those farmers markets, we were asked to come in the San Francisco Ferry Building when that was rebuilt, and we came in there and we opened a meat shop. Then I opened a restaurant. Then I was selling to
Wow.
chefs all over the Bay Area. Then we eventually did sell to a few small grocery stores. I started figuring out what it meant to like try to, we started raising and working with sheep, and then we started working with pigs and heritage pigs when that all started to take off.
Mhm.
So we did that. Was working with bison on some really neat bison programs up north, and so I just
Wow.
continued to
Now, are you doing
learn
all
and
this on your
educate
own
myself.
personal ranch? All the different
No, so
animals?
this started to branch out. Some of it were things that I was doing myself. So I would, we'd either lease land or work with somebody who had land and do it myself.
Mhm.
And then some of it I was started working, collaborating with other farmers. So that's where
Okay.
I really started to learn also, like, that this was a collaborative effort, and working
I
with,
was just gonna say
yeah,
that. You've been collaborating since the '90s, actually. It's
yeah,
something like what now has built into 99 counties, which gets me really excited.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love it. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, and it was, yeah, we all, it was great to learn how to work. I mean, I remember going into small slaughter facilities, and asking them to become certified humane, and them like, are you nuts? They're picturing
Dude, do
they're
you
going to
see
have
where
some
you are?
crazy, yeah, yeah, and they thought I was crazy, but we
Uh,
did, and we got a
it's
bunch of these
awesome.
guys on board, and same with the ranches, and so anyway, it was
Okay, so
fun and
some of our
dynamic.
listeners, I'm
So,
guessing a lot of listeners actually really aren't familiar with slaughterhouses and they really
hmm
don't think a lot about, where their meat truly, I mean, they know,
hmm
okay, maybe I buy it from a local farm, but they don't really think about the process of how it gets to their table.
sure, yeah.
And I know it's only been 10 years for our family that we've just been a little homestead. And the first time I slaughtered my first chicken, it was a hard process, and we
hmm
even had meat rabbits, and that was a hard process. But it's something that, like you said, it's so cool that you had that sign when you were
Mhm,
working at Pray the Ranch,
mhm,
that to stop and take a moment and be thankful because we would do that as a family every time.
mhm,
And I just want listeners to understand that for us, like with our pigs, we have a choice that we can load them into a trailer, drive. It's like an hour and a half to get to the closest facility for us.
mhm,
That's a USDA facility.
mhm,
And then I've never even been to one of these. You could describe the slaughterhouses, I'm sure, but
mhm,
it's not, it's a very stressful environment for the
mhm,
animals.
mhm,
And for our pigs, we only raise usually about 10 a year. They're here in a happy, carefree, idyllic situation their whole life. And then the last day, they're shoved into this trailer. They're squealing, they're upset, they're going through
mhm,
this long drive. And then they get to this, the smells and the blood and the mess of the slaughterhouse. So I don't know, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I've heard it literally impacts the quality of the meat, even the
mhm,
stress that they go through in that last
mhm,
24-hour period.
mhm. Yeah, the adrenaline can affect the meat. We really look for facilities that care, and put as much care into their process as they can, in terms of how they handle the animals, how they move them into chutes, how
Yeah.
they, the ultimate goal is to keep the stress level as absolutely low as possible. Temple Grandin always pointed out, that animals, they didn't have a preconception of death, but they certainly they could have a lot of stress response, and so the goal was to keep the stress down, and so we really really work hard to work with producers or slaughter facilities that are willing to put as much care into it as possible. There is always, the trucking factor and all of these pieces. I personally would and hope with bison, we were able to move. The USDA created what's called a non-amenable species exemption. So we're able to do a field kill with bison.
Oh, that's
Um,
great. I
yeah.
didn't know that.
Mhm.
Wow.
So that helped because when I first started working with bison, we'd have to trying to put these animals. Essentially, if you're doing it the right way and they're out in their native environment, you're basically working with wild animals, trying to get them in a trailer, trying to get them to a facility. It was just brutal.
Yeah.
And so this exemption meant a lot. So we were able to just go out and do a field kill, and it's very calm and very, as humane as you can possibly do it. And I would like to see, hopefully at some point where you could have some sort of an exemption for ranches that maybe even sold under a certain amount of animals per year. They were
Hmm.
able to do that ranch kill and then take it to a certified facility that would
Right.
be able to finish the processing. But right
Right.
now, that's still not happening. There's been a couple movements to try to push and try to get something like that in place, but we haven't quite gotten there. So in the
Okay.
meantime, we have to work. I like, we work with smaller processors that are, as thoughtful as we can, and many of them are under either the organic protocol, which does have a humane protocol for treatment of animals in these processing facilities, or you could work with a third party verified, certified humane verifier or humane verification, which would be like animal welfare or certified humane, which actually have third party, which come and inspect the processing facilities. They go through the process and they do that ongoingly. So you've
Mm.
got this third party kind of inspection on the treatment and care of the animals. So that stuff matters too. Yeah.
It does. It absolutely does, for sure.
Hmm.
Not only for the family that actually cares about the history of, the animal before it came to their table, but also just like we said, for the quality of the meat, it actually matters.
It actually matters.
Um,
Yeah.
so what connected you? At what point in your story did you meet up with Christian Ebersole, who was on the show a few months
Hmm.
ago? And how did you meet 99 counties and get involved with that?
Um, well, so 99 counties. I was in California, and at the time, um, kind of during and post COVID, I was working on an off grid project in Sequoia National Forest, and I was doing some fun things in the mountains, so I was pretty happy doing what I was doing there, and I was in a good spot. But anyway, Christian and his other partner Nick Wallace. I had met Nick at a Practical Farmers of Iowa conference in Ames, Iowa. My wife is from Iowa, and
Okay.
and my mom's side of the family are from Ames, Iowa.
What was the conference? Practical
Practical
Farmers?
Farmers of Iowa. It's a big
Okay.
organization that does really cool stuff that supports like small, sustainable regenerative agriculture in Iowa. And they
Awesome.
have a big
Okay.
conference every year, and usually it's in Des Moines or it's in Iowa State, and it's great. All these farmers get together and educators, and it's just this great dynamic, uh, big conference. And so I met Nick there and was talking to him because my wife and I had actually considered coming back to her family's property in Dubuque, Iowa. We've been thinking about maybe moving out of California.
I was
And
thinking maybe California is a little odd to an Iowan girl, maybe.
yeah, yeah. Well, she'd been there a while, so she was
Okay.
pretty established in California. But California was changing, so it
Yeah.
had changed,
Yeah.
I should say.
Uh-huh.
And this was during COVID, and
Okay.
we were still, I was
That
still
says it
selling at
all.
market.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just it was things were seemed as though they were collapsing. The veneer of civilization seemed very
Yeah.
thin that moment.
It
So
did. And
I
let's not even talk about toilet paper. I mean,
yeah, that's a whole nother story. So I know I was from the mountains, and I just I was like, I think
Yeah.
maybe I'm ready for change. So
Yeah.
um so long story short, Nick called me and said, hey, I know you're kind of happy doing what you're doing there, but we've got some support to try to start this 99 counties thing, which is really try to build this platform for these small regenerative farmers to find a place to be able to sell their product and get it out there, create this
Mhm.
supply chain and all these tools that can help them, and which I know is like really, it's not the hardest part. raising it is hard too, but then you run
Mhm.
into all these supply chain issues. And so if we
Yeah,
could
for
create that
sure.
platform and give them like an avenue to get this food out to people who care, it sounds great. And especially in a place like where we are in the Midwest, where you've got 30 million acres of corn and soybeans, monocrop,
Yeah.
and it's just maybe like he's trying to like really push for change, and I really respected that.
Yeah.
So he said, "Would you want to come out and really help and run this supply chain and help build this thing?" So I talked to my wife and I said, "Well, this is an opportunity. Let's go see if we can make change in the Midwest and do some
I
stuff."
love it.
And
I love it.
so off we went, and
And it's just beautiful how well it connects to everything that you
mhm.
had done leading up to that. I think it's just a perfect connection.
Yeah, I feel very grateful because finding a niche. This is such a niche, and so
Yeah,
finding a space in this niche where I can do what I've always done here in Iowa has been great. So
I
I
love it.
appreciate it.
And I love it that the small farmers need this platform. I mean, talk for a
Hmm.
minute about the current state of big ag. I mean, the meat that we buy at the store has probably come from one of what, four different sources? Is it how
Hmm.
many big companies own big ag? How does that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, it all circles around the big four, which is you got JBS, National Beef, Tyson, um, and Cargill. And so JBS and National Beef are owned by Brazil.
Hmm.
Close behind that in the pig world, it would be Smithfield, and that's a
Yeah.
Chinese-owned
And that's
company.
China, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so they've got a completely heavily centralized like supply chain, right? And so these guys
Hmm.
basically dominate how meat gets grown, how it gets purchased, how it gets sold, who it gets sold to for how much they
Yeah.
buy it for. It's completely controlled by
Mm.
these big four, and then a few others that circle around them. So if you're a small producer, I mean, it's such an uphill battle to try to get your stuff out there. And then on top of that, I think when I started, it was kind of I sort of had in a way I had this sort of was in this bubble because I didn't have to worry about the big guys because they didn't care what I was doing. They weren't paying any
Mm.
attention. So
Hmm.
we didn't matter. So I was kind of out there like, yeah, I'm out here doing my thing.
Right.
But then when it started to have value, then in a sense that in a lot of ways, the whole organic and even sustainable regenerative thing, it got sort of hijacked, which they can
Hmm.
do.
Yeah.
And then these terms come up like greenwashing, where you start talking
Yes.
about people who actually uh, they talk about the thing, but they don't really do the thing. And so
Yes.
that becomes something that's very hard to compete with, again, for small farmers who are trying to get their stuff
Absolutely.
out there.
Yeah. And
And
unlike you and the typical small farmers who have no marketing background, we're talking
mhm,
huge corporations that have big marketers that are
mhm,
picking up on what these greenwash terms are and they know how to use them.
that's right.
And those
Yeah,
of us who are just buying our meat at the local grocery store, we see it and it sounds good and we don't know the difference because they're very suave marketers.
that's right.
Um, Also, I think another problem, and you just made it so clear why they can make the meat so cheap. And instead of
Mhm.
asking, why is good quality regenerative meat so expensive? That's the wrong question. You're
That's the
starting
wrong
off on
question.
the question is why is meat, how can it be that cheap? How is it
That's
even
right.
possible? Right?
Yeah. Yep. No, that's exactly it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that one, and that is the question. Um, and and then you think, well, one way to go around this is to go and support farmers at farmers markets, which is great. Like, go find somebody and go support them directly. And a farmers
Yeah.
market's a good place to do that. The problem
Yeah.
is, farmers markets, as I experienced, I used to do 8 farmers markets a week. I mean, I knew the
Wow.
farmers market world very well.
There's only 7 days in a week, Doug.
I had people that were helping me, believe me, because I
Wow.
was doing everything. But we were going
Wow.
out to lots of places around the Bay Area and selling
Okay.
because that was such a great place to do it. And you could really talk to your customer. You got to know them. You
Mm.
could talk to
Yeah.
them. You could educate them. All the
Yeah.
things that we needed to do, especially if we weren't good at the marketing. You could
Right.
still stand there and talk to your consumer and
Exactly.
look
They
them
can
in the
get to
eye
know you
and
personally.
have a
Yes.
conversation. You knew their
Yeah.
kids. It was great.
Yeah.
But those markets got saturated fairly quickly. So what
Mm.
happened was, as more small farmers started getting into it, well, pretty soon, how many meat vendors can you have in a farmer's market, right?
Wow.
So now you've already
Mm.
got it's already saturated. There are only so many customers going to the farmer's market because what I found was the farmers markets are a lifestyle choice. It's something that people are fully committed and enrolled in. They have to
Mm,
get up, they have to, grab the kids, whatever. They have to drive down there. They got to find parking. They're going basically hunting for their food out at this market. And some of the markets
mm,
are busy. They don't have time. And so it's a commitment. So there are only a certain amount of consumers that are willing to do that. So if you've got only a certain amount of consumers willing to do it, and too many farmers that need access to that market, then you start to run into problems, and so then again, you're
sure,
back to the same situation where you just don't have a market for these, newer farmers that are coming online that want to sell their food. Um,
sure.
yeah, so that's
Wow.
we have to find other ways, and so that's
Mhm.
where, um, where we hopefully come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I mean, even when you meet the farmer face to face, and how do I say this? A lot of us don't even know the right questions to ask, even those small
Hmm.
farmers. And I think some of the small farmers are really doing, they're well intentioned, but they haven't learned all that you've learned and all that you just explained to us that you've gone through, and they haven't worked with Temple Graydon and they didn't work at Pray at the Ranch. And they're doing the best they can, but
Hmm.
either they just don't know, or like I said, we the consumers don't even know what to ask our local farmer. So
Hmm.
that's another reason that I got really excited about 99 counties, because
Hmm.
you guys are this middle person helping everybody know what everybody needs to know, if that makes sense.
Right, right,
And
right.
you know the right questions to ask when I, as the
Hmm.
consumer, don't.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at some point, if you care and you think about these things and you're thinking about, health of your personal health and human health, you're thinking about health of the environment and the land, and you're thinking about health of the animals, and all those things really matter to you, then at some point you have to trust somebody to be doing it the way you want it,
Right.
So, and whether or not you go and you can talk to a farmer and ask them the right questions to feel like that's the case, or you would have to trust someone like us or me or somebody to say, like, we're there and we understand this, we understand what it means for these things to be healthy, then and we're going to make sure that gets done so that we can then get it to you as an efficient way as possible. So yeah, you've got to, at some point you have to trust somebody, and you
For
hope that
sure.
when somebody can be transparent and give you the information you're looking for, and yeah, you've got to be able to
Yeah,
count on somebody to be doing it. Yeah, because
definitely.
again, a lot of these online, even it's just a lot of also those have become very big, and a lot of the products that are in those businesses are being imported. They're getting shipped 10,000 miles away
For
to come
sure.
in 100% of it. So it's stuff you've got to really kind of dig into and look at
Yeah, for
for sure.
sure. We have to pause this episode though, because I need to ask you a question. Did you know there is a way to grow amazing fresh food with no worries of weeds, pests, or any concern about poor weather conditions? In fact, you can grow food year round, literally in your kitchen, no matter where you live. I'm talking about sprouts. They are nutrient dense food packed with vitamins and minerals, fiber, protein, and antioxidants. And I love that there are all different types of seeds you can sprout. So you get varying nutrient profiles with all the different seeds that you sprout. I've put together a really helpful resource for you. Go to solelyrested.com/sprout, SPROUT. And there I'm going to explain maximum benefits, give you lots of insights into how you can sprout well, give you tips and tricks to avoid any problems, tell you what sprouts to use and how to use them. All of it, solelyrested.com/sprout to get that resource. And there I will introduce you to True Leaf Market. I mean, I've been telling you about True Leaf Market for years and years because I love this company. They've offered you a really sweet discount available for a very limited time. Go check it all out at solelyrested.com/sprout. Okay, so we have to just trust somebody. So let's get back to those terms at the grocery store and let's
Hmm.
talk about, do any of them mean anything? First of all, okay, let's start with chicken. I know the chicken
Hmm.
terms that mean nothing,
Hmm.
like free range, cage free doesn't usually, cage free means nothing, right? That just means
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of chickens in one big factory room.
Yeah, it's just a big cage.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, cage free is not that one doesn't have a lot of doesn't carry much weight. Free range they do require a certain amount of space for the birds to
True.
move around, so you have that. Some of the things, like the idea of vegetarian fed, that's sort of a silly one because chickens don't eat
They
aren't
don't eat meat,
vegetarians.
right?
So, but what it really means is that they're able to feed them, fairly, unless it's, organic or something like that.
Hmm.
If it just says vegetarian fed, it just means that they're reminding you that they're using relatively cheap corn and soy, to
Yeah.
feed their birds, and that's it. So nothing
Right.
else, So
Okay.
yeah.
What is a low carbon chicken?
I don't know much about that. Low carbon chicken means anything. That would be essentially, I think, kind of tried to be tied um, to the regenerative sort of movement and maybe
Right.
some regenerative certifications. But I don't know that it in and of itself has any sort of certification. So, I mean,
Okay.
maybe that's changed, but as far as I know, that doesn't mean anything. I get where they're going with it, but I don't know. I mean, carbon free chicken would mean like all the way back, and you couldn't have a carbon free chicken when you're feeding them any kind of corn or soy or any
Sure.
sort of a green monocrop grain feed. So,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I don't think that one really carries much weight.
Okay. And in fact, that's probably true with almost all these terms, right? I mean, can the marketers
hmm
just slap something on there and there's no backup behind it in some of these cases?
Well, for some things they can, some things they can't. It depends on if there's been some sort of a certification or standards that have been set. So
Okay.
like obviously you can see that people will put natural beef on labels and
Mm.
throw the word natural around. I just read that they had just done a study of consumers, and 40% of consumers that they had interviewed still think that natural and organic mean the same thing. So throwing natural on labels still
Wow.
is still useful, right? So
Wow.
you're seeing that quite a bit, and it means nothing. There's no regulation or no standards around. I mean, what does natural even mean when you're talking about an
Right.
animal, right? So,
Absolutely.
um, yeah, so those are terms you really want to watch out for, and unless
Now,
it's got. Mhm,
having worked at the very first organic certified farm like
mhm.
ever, you can definitely tell us about organic. There's definitely meaning, but they can't just put that word on there.
No,
Okay.
organic, it's a strict set of standards, and they're focused on chemical free, no herbicide, no pesticide, no fungicides, no zero antibiotics in the system. Even in your slaughter facilities, you can't use chemicals, right? So a
Oh,
lot
I
of
actually
times
didn't
with a
know that.
beef
Okay.
carcass, they'll spray it with a bleach solution. Can't do that. You spray it with apple
Right.
cider vinegar. So they're very strict standards for organic, and those are third party inspected, and they're testing even for drift gets on your farm and your cattle are eating. They can uh, revoke the standard or put it into isolation or something like that.
Hmm.
If you have an animal that gets, and there's, the zero antibiotics is very strict. So even if you have an animal that gets sick and you have to give it therapeutic antibiotics for a time, that animal have to be taken totally out of the system
Oh,
completely.
wow.
It
Hmm.
can't go back in the system. So I mean, it's pretty strict, and these are standards. So yeah, organic's still meaningful, and so it's still got weight, I
Okay.
believe.
But
So.
it doesn't tell us anything, of course, about the standard of living for the animal, right? It's
Well,
just,
actually, organic has done a better job of putting humane treatment protocols in place
oh,
as well.
wow.
So now, when they do their inspection, they're also adding these humane protocols. So I will say that they have done that.
Okay.
Early on, that wasn't so much the case,
Okay.
but they have done it,
Okay.
and so. Yeah, I think, I would say that organic, my experience was that as we moved along, as we became certified organic, that organic didn't do it maybe enough to educate consumers about how hard it was to do and how much it meant to have meat that was certified organic. So organic still matters a lot in the vegetable world, but in the meat world, consumers don't really look for an organic label
Hmm.
necessarily, especially in
Hmm.
beef and
Hmm.
cuts of meat. I don't see necessarily that people look for that. So what you'd
Hmm.
see is if you had an organic piece of meat next to maybe something that was just sort of local and grass fed or whatever, you weren't necessarily getting more value out of it. So more producers stopped moving in that direction because there just wasn't enough value in it.
Yeah.
It's still out there, but it's not as I don't think there's as much energy into it as there once was.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
And do you think maybe that's because maybe we care more about organic for our vegetables because we understand how it grows more so than
Mhm.
connecting the meat to the animal and all of the extra story behind it, maybe?
I think that could be true, yeah.
Hmm.
And they talk more about it, obviously the pesticides and,
Right.
you're thinking more about pesticides, things like pesticides and herbicides and things like that in produce than you are in necessarily a cut of meat. And how
That's right.
much of that transfers, when you're thinking about it just from a human health perspective, how much of that stuff transfers into the meat? And they're saying probably not much. So then you're saying, well, maybe that doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so in our protocols in 99 counties, we don't allow any, we are not certified organic. A lot of our products are organic, but we don't certify, but we don't allow for herbicide, um, the pesticides and such. We just don't, we're just not
Right.
proponents. We don't want all that glyphosate in the system and so on and
Exactly.
so forth, and pesticides. So we don't allow it. And the only reason we don't do certified organic is because we wanted to create a space for transitional growers of certain grains that have to be fed to the omnivores, the pigs and the chickens, to have a market so that if they were moving from conventional to organic, there's a lot of food out there that's not being able to be used as organic
Hmm.
feed because it's in the middle. They have a
Ah.
3 year process to get from conventional to organic. We wanted to be able to create a market for those people that were making the effort to become
Mm.
organically certified by buying this food and then feeding it to our pigs and chickens. And so we don't require, at the moment, we don't require the organic certification.
Okay, that's great.
Hmm.
Well, I personally, as a sugar maker, I'm asked by people, well, do I need to buy organic maple syrup? And I am
Hmm.
always telling people no. I
Hmm.
mean, the only reason, if you really want to buy it, the only reason would be to support the fact that that sugar maker went through a lot of hoops. I mean, a
Hmm.
lot of hoops to get
Hmm.
that name on their bottle. And if
Hmm.
you want to support them and pay a little more to thank them for that, go for it. But
Yeah.
otherwise, maple syrup is maple syrup. It comes out of the
Hmm.
tree and we bottle it. So,
Hmm.
so I think I understand that. I love what you're saying, that you need to give grace to the ranchers who are doing all the right things, and the meat
Yeah,
is high quality meat. It doesn't need to have the label if they're following the right protocols,
that's
in my
right.
opinion.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree 100%. We do what we do mostly so that we can create some sort of structure around commitment to a structure that we can explain to people that's all the same, so that when they
Right,
ask us about where it's coming from, we can, look them in the eye and be honest about exactly
right,
what we do. Otherwise, you could go out to a farmer's market and talk to, 5 different ranchers, and they may be doing things a little differently, but it's okay,
right,
as long as they're, you know, trying to do the right thing.
right. You mentioned grass fed a while ago. I didn't want
Mhm.
to stop you. Can you define that exactly? Because that has different meanings to different people, right?
Yeah. Well, now they do have, I think, a grass finish certification. Grass, I mean, essentially, obviously, we're dealing with the ruminants and we're dealing with cattle and sheep and ruminant animals, and they are built to eat grass, for their whole lives. And so we there you'll find are two things. You'll find just simply grass fed could be, so you've got your cow calf operations. Those animals are grass fed for the first 12 to 16 months of their lives or more even,
Hmm.
and then they go to the feed yard where they're fed grains, and things that can be very hard on their bodies and on their stomachs and so on and so forth. So but that someone still might call it grass fed because grass fed for the majority of its life.
Okay.
Now the
I was just
question
going to
is,
ask you that.
yeah.
So that's not
Mhm.
regulated in any way.
That is not, no. And then you
Okay.
have grass finished, which would mean that the animals were finished on grass, not in a feedlot, not in a they're finished, just able to graze and finish on grass. And that's a lot harder to do. It's a lot harder to finish and takes more time to
Yeah.
finish a beef on grass than it does to stuff them with grain and
Absolutely.
get
The
them
grain
fat
is
quickly.
fattening them up, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
essentially like putting somebody, if they're in a feed lot, essentially put them in an area where they don't move as much and they don't travel as much and burn as many calories, and then feeding them something akin to like Krispy Kremes, until
Yeah.
they get to weight, and
What a
them
way to
having a
die.
four chambered stomach, and a
Right.
very complex digestive system. Those grains are hard on them, and it creates
Mm,
a situation where they can get acidosis, which is very hard on on them, and can actually kill them if they don't
mm,
get them to the slaughter point before that happens. And so that's where
Mhm.
often early on, especially that's where the antibiotics would come in, was to
Yeah.
treat that because they might be sick. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I actually don't know. Do people sometimes sell meat as grass finished but not grass fed? Does that ever happen?
No, I've never
Okay.
seen that. I mean, it's the
Okay.
same.
Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
So how do we know what terms are like third party verified and what ones mean nothing? Is there any way to know that?
Well, you would look at the label. I mean, if it's on the label, if you see something like there's a regenerative certification, or like land and market certified is one that comes to mind, or regenerative organic certified ROC,
Okay.
or certified organic. Those are real things, and you can go right onto it, then track that to a site which will explain to you what exactly that means. But though, and I will say that those certifications, if they're on there, they take effort, So they do mean that somebody's committed to these trying to
For
do that.
sure.
So yeah, and the organic versus regenerative. I mean, regenerative tends to be more flexible and holistic in how it looks at practices. They're not as standardized as organic. So you can be regeneratively certified and not be organic, right?
Right.
Um,
Okay.
Organic is looking for more like an overarching, like ecological uplift in the entire program. So they're looking like at a healthy soil, they're looking at a healthy mineral cycle. They're looking at biodiversity, overarching biodiversity in your program. So,
Mhm.
and then they're monitoring that over time. So, yeah, it's looking for, they're generally looking for like an overarching improvement and ecological uplift in your whole program. So they're very complementary, but they're not exactly the same.
Right.
So it's just, something to kind of think about.
Different focuses. So what questions should we be asking our meat suppliers?
Well, again, I first of all, I'd say like, what are your values? What matters to you, and then go and find out if they're aligned
Good
with
point.
what matters to you.
Mhm. Mhm.
For some, we found, that some people it's mostly health. They want grass-fed beef because it's considered healthier and more omegas and leaner, or whatever. And
Right.
some are more concerned about the environment, and they want to know that these animals aren't, causing environmental degradation. Some are more concerned about the humane treatment of animals, and then probably many are concerned with some semblance of all three.
Right. Right.
So well, yeah, and so I think around asking, figuring out what your values are around this, and then going out and doing the footwork to find somebody that's actually supporting your values, and then finding somebody you trust. I mean,
Mhm.
this is important. So this is where your food comes from. This is the stuff that's feeding your body. It's also these practices are the things that make or break, like how our planet's treated, and so on and so forth. So it's important stuff.
It
So it's
is.
worth the effort, I think.
It is.
Yeah,
And I think it can be overwhelming. It can make your head spin. The
it
more you
can.
educate yourself, I think the more difficult it
Hmm.
seems sometimes.
That's right. And it's gotten
So,
more complicated, and when I first started, we were trying to figure out. There was the organic piece we were trying to figure out, and into the standardized stuff, and
mhm.
then there was that we did. There was no regenerative, that hadn't even come up yet. So we were looking at
Mm,
sustainability.
okay.
Sustainability to us meant people, that word got thrown around a lot, and people
Mhm.
didn't necessarily know what it really meant. And to us, it meant, could we continue to do what we did, to use our practices in a way that we could do it in perpetuity without draining the resources around us, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's what we focused on. But as things have evolved, we move into this regenerative space, which is awesome. It's like an evolution, right? We're moving
Mhm.
forward, and we're looking now, not only how can we do it in perpetuity without draining the resources, but how can we make it better? How can we
Mm,
add more? How can we improve? Um, and the environment around us. So how can we add back? How can we build? How can we create in our environments? And so it's a whole new way of looking at it. But I think this evolution is important. And so it's sort of understanding it, and then sort of moving as we all move along, like, starting to support those kinds of practices and ways of, looking at the world. So,
yeah. I agree. I love it. I love what you said that it's evolved into something even better. And
hmm.
I have never seen anything like what you guys are doing, and it gets me truly excited to be a tiny little part of it by getting a box delivered
uh,
on my front porch just yesterday.
yeah,
I had my second box delivered, and the
right.
meat. It's fun to think about the ranchers and all the stories and all the things behind it, but I'll just come right down to it. On the dinner table, the meat that you guys are shipping out is delicious.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Well, thank
delicious.
you. Yeah, we put a lot of effort. I mean, I learned again, another thing I learned early on is that, you really want at the end of the day, it comes down, it's an aesthetic, and it's about like the flavor and the quality and the
Mhm.
taste. And, it's the time you put in, and the
Mhm.
terroir of where it came from and all of those things. And you really want at the end, like you said, at the end of the day, it's about what's on your plate, and how
Yeah.
it tastes and how it makes you feel, you
Mhm.
know, both, just simply that it aligns with your values and then also just how it makes you feel physically. So it's
Absolutely.
all of those things coming together, and, so, yeah, it's
You're part of a really great thing, Doug, and I'm so
yeah,
thankful you're doing what you're doing. I really am.
yeah. Well, we're grateful that it's great to have your support too, because 'cause we've gotta get the word out. Like I said,
Yeah.
there are big forces out there, and we are really, like, we're fairly small. We're gonna scale at the rate that we can scale base and keep our
Mhm.
values intact, and we're not gonna go wild and start importing product, just to make sure we get it in the hopper and grow the customer base to the moon or whatever. So,
Right. Right.
we're just gonna keep doing what we do.
Well, you're doing it fantastically well. I can tell you that from the 2 boxes I've been enjoying, my family is
Hmm.
absolutely in love with it,
Yeah,
and
thank
I'm
you.
already addicted. So
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and absolutely to know that I'm not getting my meat from Brazil or my pork
Hmm.
from China, it's a
Hmm.
really great thing, and to know I'm supporting the small farms out there in the Midwest.
Well,
So
good.
keep doing what you're doing.
I will. Yeah, and we will.
Thanks so much,
All right.
Doug.
Thanks, Michelle. Much appreciated.
I hope you enjoyed chatting with Doug as much as I did. I will say I got even more wonderful information as we chatted before the recording and then after the recording. I really picked Doug's brain about the most amazing cuts of beef and the ways that he loves to prepare them and cook them. That was super fun. In fact, maybe I should have him back on and we should talk about that. Would you guys like to know more about that? And before we started recording, we chatted about, animal head to tail and all the meats that so many people shy away from and that would get wasted in a traditional meat system per se. And that was just really it's fascinating to have time to pick the brain of a rancher like Doug. So, you know what? Maybe I should have Doug on a couple more times because that would be great to talk about as well with you guys. Let me know what you think, and I'll see if he's available to come back and chat some more. Um, so anyway, make sure you go to solelyrested.com/beef to take advantage of that amazing offer from 99 counties and try this meat yourself, guys. I can't recommend it enough. And go to solelyrested.com/podcast if you would like to get a weekly email from me that shares with you the links that we discuss and to always keep you updated on what the next episode is. Just go to solelyrested.com/podcast. And I think that is it for today. Of course, I don't tell you guys often, but anytime, if you want to go over and leave a review on Apple Podcast, a review means so much. It is so helpful. Please take a second to do that if you haven't, to let folks know that this is a podcast that you enjoy and that you find encouraging and helpful. So, thanks for listening, friends. Remember, it's easy to forget how blessed we are to live this life. So, enjoy those simple, everyday efforts. Get yourself some of the most high quality beef and support small farms while you're doing it. But enjoy the efforts because it is not an easy life, but it is a very good life.